All right, Courtney, welcome to the Sharpening Strength podcast, man. I'm so stoked to have you on here today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. This is a real honor. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun today. And I want to just have you kick things off, sharing your story, both personally, professionally, where you've been, where you're at now, and what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Courtney Morse. I'm married. I got a family of two. A couple kids. Henry is 11, and Claire is just turned 8. We're located in Wichita, Kansas. I am a kind of a performance-based physical therapist. We work out of a gym. So we get to work on people, like really hone in and work on the performance side of things that they're interested in. We see a lot of runners, we see a lot of weightlifters, things like that. We've had my practice for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was a PT, kind of in-network stuff for the first 5 years or so. My wife and I, kind of as usual in a lot of workplaces, like we worked for about 5 years, or I worked for about 5 years and kind of got burnt out on it. And so, we were sitting down at some evening where we were just both exhausted and worn out. And I said, is this how it's going to go for like the next 30, 40 years? Like, we're just going to reel it in like this for the rest of our life. And, she's like, I hope not. And so we kind of started planning our exit strategy. And like in the start of 2016, or the summer of 2016, she and I both quit our jobs. She was a high school teacher. We both quit our jobs. We packed up the kids. I got a PT license in Oregon, and we just drove the camper out there. We didn't have a place in mind yet. And so we spent 6 months, I ended up working in skilled nursing facilities because that's where the jobs were at. But we worked there for 6 months, a couple of different locations. We lived in Tennessee. We lived in North Carolina. We drove back and kind of got plugged back into our regular 40-hour work week. And we realized, like, oh, no, we can, there's no going back. We can't go back to that kind of thing. So it was within, 3 or 4 months after I started that I was, working my way towards this own business. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah. And you said primarily a lot of runners and weightlifters that you're working with. And I guess, how long are you seeing them typically? What are you guys working on?
Yeah. So it's fun because the runners, I heard a really good analogy the other day, is that most runners now, like even weightlifters too, because of CrossFit and, all this HIIT training and stuff like that, everybody's got like a really big engine. They all have really good cardiovascular systems, but they're sitting on like a tiny little chassis, right? As that their ligaments and our tissues aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And so that's kind of what we work with on the runners is we're taking this big Corvette engine and we're getting them off of this, Chevette, or this, Honda Civic chassis. And so we see them on average. I will see them over the course of time, like 6 or 8 weeks, or 6 visits over the course of sometimes 10 weeks and things like that. And we tell them up front, like, we're going to get rid of this pain stuff that you've got going on relatively quickly. Even if it's been going on for years, like, we'll take care of that stuff in pretty short order. But then we get to the fun stuff, and physiology takes time. It takes a long time for, muscle, physiology to break down and build back up. So we're not going to do that in, 3 times a week for 4 weeks. Like, so we space these visits out and we let them go in there, screw things up, catch themselves back on fire. Like, cool, now we know where you're at. So, if we don't do a good job of reloading them and prepping them for the life that they want to live afterwards, we're kind of setting them up for failure. So on average, we're seeing people, 6 times or so, but we space it out over, sometimes 3 months.
Yeah, I think that's a really great model too. And we practice similar, which is how we're connected. And the performance PT model, for those that don't know too, can you talk a little bit more on that? So that's not just getting back to base level of function. You're working with some people that are trying to push their limits.
Absolutely. Yeah. We work on people of all levels. We work on athletes running their first 5K, but we also work on, elite college sports and athletes for that kind of stuff too. But a lot of times, if you're, as well as I do, if you're practicing in network and things like that, a lot of times insurance wants to shut down when you are functional. And we hear these kind of horror stories all the time of somebody coming out with a post-op rehab and they get 4 visits and that's it. And, like, because they can climb up and down the stairs, like, hey, you're functional, you're walking, and, they're never going to get close to getting back and playing soccer again. And so what we say is we kind of bridge the gap between, functional and optimal. We really want to teach people how to kind of fix these issues themselves and how to do this stuff themselves, because we want them to go out there and that there's a lot of reason people exercise, and none of it involves, like people enjoying doing burpees in the basement, during the COVID and stuff like that. A lot of people were doing burpees in the basement, and they realize how life sucking and that is. And so, you exercise for so many more reasons than that. It's the social component, it's the competitive component, all these other things. And so if you just strip somebody of that and say like, yeah, you're too old to run anymore, like it's like cutting off a limb for some people. And so we really want to give them the freedom to go out and do the stuff that they love to do, and not feel like we need to restrict them. I've got triathletes in their 80s that come in from time to time. We're like, yeah, man, like this is the guy I want to be. I don't want to be, the guy that's like, well, my sister-in-law said I should stop exercising when I was 41 years old, and so I did, and now I have all these heart conditions. Like it's just never going to come up in our practice. So it's a lot of fun working with folks that way.
Yeah, definitely. And that reminded me, I was talking with a client today and one of our visits, and he was talking about a doc who he doesn't see anymore that found out he was running marathons and pulled up x-rays or images of what a marathoner's knee looks like, yeah, whatever that one marathoner was. And then
right.
the non one was, and the one looks all nasty. And of course, and it's not what we're sacrificing on telling people those stories and pulling them out of those activities. And I don't want to go too far down the runner's path, but you probably see people that have been told that they shouldn't run anymore. And how do you go about some of those conversations to still empower them?
Absolutely. And so we have some of that conversation about, here's what your x-ray looks like. And, you'll hear stories about a doctor taking a look at both knees, x-rays of both knees, and says like, hey, I'm going to go replace this one. It's like, well, I have symptoms in this one. And so we're never treating people's images. We're not treating, their diagnoses. We're not treating the disc in their back or whatever. We're treating the function. And so with that, I'm training a new PT right now, and I'm kind of trying to deprogram him a little bit from all this differential diagnosis that people learn early on. It's granted, it's very important, and when they're coming in the door, we want them to be aware of these, yellow and red flags and things like that. But we say like, well, does it matter if it's rotator cuff tendonitis, or if it's this or it's that or it's whatever? It's like, no, because the treatment is a lot of times very similar. And so we want to set people up. And, we'll use, like kind of some stoplight system or whatever, like, hey, if your pain's between here and here, green light, go check it out. Or, if it's red and, it's here and here, like, yeah, don't do that. But like, we want to empower them, but we do it with a lot of strengthening and things like that. We tell them, the manual therapy stuff that we're going to do, like, this will help get you there faster. But like the real result of this long-term comes from, doing the exercises and being super consistent with this stuff, being really diligent. You don't have to spend your whole day doing these home exercises and these corrective exercises, but the more specific that you are within, the more diligent, like the faster you can get back to doing the stuff that you love. And so that's where we really try to empower people, say like, hey, you're the one that knows your body the best. Like, you listen to your own stuff, but sometimes you have to teach people how to listen to their body, because they're just so used to being in pain and being miserable all the time that they sometimes don't know what it feels like to feel good.
Yeah, so well said. And that's something the process for getting there though is it's not complicated, but and what we want to talk about here today and dive into a little deeper is the consistency of it. You talk about being diligent, and that's where we see the change. People seeing us, and especially in our model where we're seeing someone once, we're working with them once, or we're help building out their programming, and then we're letting them go to work for a little bit, and then we're checking in and making our modifications. It requires consistency to be able to see those changes over time. And you guys are doing some awesome things, and the people you're working with. And while everyone would say, yes, I know I need to be more consistent or this and that, people just aren't doing it. There's still a lot of people out there that have such a hard time with being consistent. And that's if you're trying for a fitness goal, a nutrition goal, relationship goal. There's a lot of things that bleeds over into. And I want to kind of jump into your thoughts on what does it really mean to be consistent, and how do you help people do this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think people, for some reason, their New Year's resolution blows up every single year in their face, and they get 3 or 4 weeks out and they shut things down. Like, I think people for some reason have the expectation that things are going to go well right away, and they're going to see all these massive changes and these massive goals. And when we're talking about consistency, we're talking about habit change, and habit formation just doesn't work that way. Our bodies and our neurochemistry and our hormones and things like that weren't really weren't really made to do that kind of stuff. And so we I had somebody yesterday, and she's been in pain for 10 years or whatever, and so she's kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And we were talking about exercise, and we're like, well, how are we going to make this change to get you to do this thing? And she's like, I don't know, I just don't want to do it. And it's like, cool, we're not going to hit that thing yet, because there's no point in me pushing this thing. Like, people have to arrive at this thing on their own. And so I know a lot of people think that they're really motivated, and they're really motivated for a short period of time. But habit change is about taking something that's very active and very thought driven, and putting it on autopilot, right? And so you think about driving. When you're first driving, you're 15 years old or whatever, like, you're thinking about every little thing. You're like, how do I move my mirrors? How do I turn the wipers on or whatever? But now you sometimes might show up to work and you're like, oh, I didn't even pay attention to it at all. It's automatic, right? And so we have to be able to tie these habits to an emotion, right? And that's what a lot of this comes back to, is like the same reason that we that people start eating junk food, or start taking drugs, or start doing whatever, is they find some kind of neuroatomical emotion, or some kind of emotion that ties with this habit. And so you hear about this all the time with the study of people during the Vietnam era, where these people were in Vietnam, and everyone was addicted to heroin and things like that. And then they took them out of that scene, and they came back, and they were anticipating this big swath of soldiers coming back, and everybody's gonna be addicted to smack and things like that. People changed their scene, they changed their settings, they changed their people that they hang out with, and they went back to life as usual. Well, the same thing kind of goes too. It's like, we have to take these big kind of complicated habits, break them down into very small things, and start like getting some success, and building on that success. Like, there are still things that I struggle with all the time. Last weekend was Father's Day weekend. We went out, we ate like very poorly. We drank more than we normally do. And, we were, just making all kinds of unhealthy decisions. But where that is maybe now a once a quarter kind of habit, where it used to be like every weekend, like, that's a lot of progress for me. And now I can beat myself up and say, like, oh man, I really botched it this weekend. But for me, and going through this cycle and this process of working on myself, I was like, well, this is actually pretty good. And so, to give yourself some leeway, expect to fail, and not blow yourself up every time you do. Not quit what you're doing because you failed, but rather see the positives from it and build on that. And it takes years. It takes a long period of time.
Yeah, and I love what you said about giving yourself some grace, and knowing that this is a long-term game. And I think too many people treat it as the short-term thing, and it becomes binary, this all or nothing thing of like, well,
Right.
I messed up here, so I'm done.
Put it down. Yeah.
And the people you're working with, that we see a lot of people that have those setbacks, and that could be pain flares up. That can be, okay, I didn't do as well in the race. That could be nutrition wise. How do you help get people back on track and recenter them in those cases?
Yeah, part of it is, so I tell people from the beginning, there's two parts of our evaluation. There's the subjective part, the stuff that you tell me, the stuff that, that you're feeling, and the stuff that you are working towards. But then there's the objective stuff that we're measuring, right? And sometimes it's really hard for people to be like, well, yeah, my knee moves 10 degrees more or whatever. Like, they couldn't care less. And I say, we're only measuring this objective stuff for that time, in that point in time where you feel like, man, this is really not working, and I am not getting there. Like, oh, nope, here's the data. Because, sometimes that helps people realize, like, because they're living with these issues 24 hours a day. And sometimes the lack of symptoms doesn't always register with them as improvement. Like, oh, I guess now that you mentioned it, I am sleeping better. Like, oh, cool. We don't think about that thing, but like, these are reminders that we have to provide people. And so we go back each time that they come in. It's kind of like a little progress note, because again, sometimes it's a month in between we see them. And we get to have those conversations about, hey, remember where you started? Hey, remember how this is going? And so people, they forget quickly how much progress that they've actually made. And so reminding them where they're coming from, and whether it's on like a weight loss journey, or it's a strength program or something like that, like, just to take a step back, stop being so hard on yourself, and look back at all the things that you have achieved, and how well things can be going and are going if you just show up every day.
Man, so true. And there's people, I swear, and the people that are seeing us more frequently, even the people that are seeing us every week, I have to remind some of these people every single week or every single session of reminding them how far they can, and they'll be so encouraged to be like, oh yeah, no, I do remember that I couldn't do that. And then the next time
Right.
they come in, they're like, I just I don't know if I'm making progress. And that's
Yeah.
just such a hard cycle to break out of. And I know you mentioned the emotion earlier of tying it into a positive emotion. A two-part question: how do you help people identify what negative emotion they might be tying to something, and how do you start to flip that script?
Right. And so it's a really buzzy and catchy word, but there is a little bit of mindfulness that has to come with that. And so that doesn't mean that you have to, sit down every day for 10 minutes. I know for me that I do. And for me, that was, again, I tried 3 separate years to get this habit off the ground. And so like I do some mindfulness, I do some gratitude journaling, and I do these kind of things that I, again, failed at for a long period of time before it kind of started to click. And again, once that thing clicks, now for me, now it's habitual, now it's automatic. And so if I miss those things, like I feel like my day feels off. And so for them, it might just be like, sit down and kind of take 5 minutes or take 2 minutes or take 1 minute and just think about like, hey, how are things going? How are you feeling? Think about where you're at now and be grateful from where you're at now compared to where you were then. And we know, I mean, from a scientific standpoint, like gratitude changes your brain. And so like meditation changes your brain. And so when we want to talk to people about this, like, there's apps that I recommend to folks, and, there's, different resources and things like that. But I don't want to make it too daunting to them. I don't want to give them one other thing. I'm already giving them 10 minutes of exercises to do every day, every time. So, I said, hey, set up a reminder on your phone, and every day at noon, take 1 minute to just kind of think about the good things. And so sometimes it's just something that's small, but when you can check that off the list, then you can make it a little bit more challenging. But some people want to jump right into it, and they want to get in the deep end, and they are shocked when they fail, and like you can see it coming a mile away. And so that's some of the methodology that we use, but it really is specific to everybody, because some people are like, they're just on it and they get on it really quickly. And other people, like you can tell, you can smell it a mile away, like they're going to struggle with this for a long period of time. And so you just kind of check back with them and say like, hey, how's this coming?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Knowing that you're going to be different than the person next to you, where we've all talked to someone who, like, at least seemingly made up their mind, and then the next day the kitchen was raided of all bad stuff, and they were all in it.
Yep.
And some people will thrive on that method, and some people will fail on it. And how do you know what's right for you? Is it trial and error? Are there any other strategies that people can do to identify some of that?
There's actually a good book. And I can't think of it off the top of my head, and I'll let you put it in the show notes if I can come up with it. But she kind of goes through there. Man, I really wish I knew it. And she kind of classifies these, 4 different personality types, basically. Boy, I know I could come up with this thing. It doesn't matter. But to help people know what type that they identify with, like I am in this classification, like I'm an upholder. I know if I start a book, I'm going to read this terrible book until the end of that book. And some people are, another type where like they can't finish one job if you ask them like, hey, take out the trash, and they walk out halfway and they forget what they're doing, and then they come back. Like, so knowing which type of person that you are will help you identify, here, I am not alone. If I'm a rebel and I'm going to oppose everything that, anybody tells me, like, cool, how can we reword our language to make this seem like it's your ideal? And so finding these different personality types, and in this book, dang it, oh man, I want to have it. In this book, she talks about it, but it's a really good way for people to know why they act the way that they do, and good strategies that they can employ to make things work for them. Because again, not everybody has the same motivations, and not everybody works in that same way.
Yeah, and you can give me the book later, and I'll include it in the show notes.
I
But
appreciate that.
yeah, no, I love what you said about being able to connect with people. We can feel we're so alone, and I think that can make things daunting as well. If we're like, oh, I'm the only one that everyone else is doing it this way and achieving their goals, but I'm struggling with it because of X or Y. And knowing that, hey, these are common things that people follow, and being able to connect with those things, have those strategies, I think can be a big piece of that.
Yeah, I came up with it. It was on Audible. Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. It's a great book. It's great. Yeah, Better Than Before.
Cool. I'll put that in the show notes too.
Yes.
And so the other big piece, and I know you talk a lot about this, we talk a lot about, and the people we work with is on the same line of emotions of connecting to our why and finding what that why actually is. Because this is, at least in my own personal experience and the people with the clients we get to work with, until we can really hone in on what that is, habit change and consistency in these things don't fully set in. And I know you've seen some similar things in inside conversations we've had, but can you talk a little more about what that means for the people you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you'll get a lot of kind of generic answers as to why people are sitting across from you. But again, people are they're driven by emotion. We are emotional, irrational creatures, but we're easy to predict. And so if somebody comes in and sits across from us and say like, hey, my knee pain or my knee has been bothering me for 6 months, and you kind of you have to figure out like, well, why are you acting on this now? Like it's been bothering you for 6 months. Why now? And so when you dig into that kind of stuff, you will find sometimes these layers of thought that they didn't know that they had. And so when we talk about the evaluation process from us, like it's like 20% talking and 80% listening. And you prompt them with a nice question and say, well, why is this thing important to you? And they'll give you kind of a line and you listen for, maybe 5 minutes or something like that. And they're like, cool. Why is that important? So my knee hurts. Well, now I can't run. Okay. Well, why is that? Why is running important to you? Well, because I lost 40 pounds, a few years ago running. And now that it hurts, I'm afraid I'm going to start gaining it all back. Well, cool. Why is being lighter more important to you? Or why is that important to you? Well, I want my wife to find me attractive and I want to keep up with my kids. I want to be like, okay, now we have this tie back to why you're in my office. And now we can kind of use that, as a carrot and say like, cool, you're not doing your exercises. Hey, that's no big deal. It doesn't bother me. My knees feel great. But guess what? If you want to go play with your kids or your grandkids down the road, we've got to put in a little bit of time, and a little bit of effort. And so tying back to those emotional reasons are really important for people. And, in our practice, you know as well as I do, we get to spend a lot amount of time just sitting there and kind of having conversations, similar to, direct primary care where we're talking to patients for a long period of time compared to, a lot of other practitioners. And so we really get to know our patients and we really get to know what's important to them, and we know their family and we know their real motivations. And so I think it's absolutely where healthcare is going. I think people are kind of fed up with the system of just get kind of churned through the system. And so they're seeking out people like us because it's a better product. They feel more, they feel more connected to the process that we're providing.
Yeah, no, so well said. And that's the people that do best with us. And I'm sure it's similar for you guys, is the ones that they come in, they have that strong why, or we're able to identify and bring that up, and they can click what they're doing with us
Right.
to what that is. And those people just thrive, and they can weather the ups and downs better. They can, if they have a setback, it's like, okay, yeah, where other people use setback as an excuse to be like, well, this isn't working. I'm done on this.
Yeah. I warn people too. And I tell them around visit 4, I tell them like, hey, things are moving well. You're doing strong. You're stronger now. You're going to go out and you're going to go out there and like flare yourself up. You're going to go out and break yourself, and you're going to feel like, woe is me. The sky is falling. I'm starting all over. And I tell them ahead of time. It makes me seem like Nostradamus as well too, which adds, it adds credibility for what we are doing. We say, hey, you're going to go out. You're going to do too much. You're going to come back sore and angry and painful. And we say, cool. Now we know where your real level of potential is. Like, because if we're hanging out, half cocked all the time, and we're never really stressing things and trying things out, we never know how high we can potentially shoot. So overcoming some of this apprehension that comes with coming off of an injury is a really important thing, a really tough thing for people to do. They're so used to favoring these things for so long. And so to have that conversation first is really important.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's in my experience in the traditional PT clinic insurance model, and nothing against the PTs in that model. It's the
Sure.
system of it, because I went through the same things. Is
Yeah.
you have a runner come in and you don't get enough time, either length of time or visits, to you have them feeling better, but you haven't really gotten to test those things out. And then you either don't know, or you see those people back because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you were doing so great and you had no pain
Yeah.
in anything, but all you were doing was walking around the house, going up and down stairs. And
Yeah. They're
when you're
functional.
yeah,
they're not optimal.
when you're a marathon runner, it's like,
Yes.
how do we know you're actually better? And we have to get out and test it.
Bingo. Exactly right.
And this is another thing I wanted to get into, because we have the two sides of the people. We have the ones that we have to really kind of light a fire under to get consistent, and then we have the ones to pull back a little bit. Do you see some people in the setting you're in, of the people that we need to throttle back a little bit? Can there be too much consistency?
She was my last patient today. And so as we're going through these exercises, she's like, oh my God, that kills me. It's like, that really hurts. And so we said, well, stop doing it. And she's like, what? I never stop doing it when it hurts. It's like, stop doing it. And it goes back to, she had a personal trainer at the Y or something like that at some point. It was like just having her power through all these exercises. We say, well, we're not trying to burn the candle at both ends here. Like, we are trying to make sure that, she just turned 50. We're trying to make sure that you're still running in 25 years. Right. And so we have to kind of pull things back. And, all of her exercise, she was doing the couch stretch, for example. And she's like, man, I'm dying. Like, I almost threw up after that. I was like, way too hard. Stop doing it that hard. And like, consistently, like every time she comes in, we have this conversation, but that's how she's programmed. That's how she's wired. And so we have to, again, know what words and what strategies that we have to tell her to be like, stop doing that. So we added her onto our coaching app just so we can be on there and be like, get feedback from her after every exercise. And like, cool, how's that going? She's like, too easy. Like, nope, we're not changing it, because she's going to blow herself up every chance that she gets. And so, yeah, runners, I think, are the worst. But that's what makes them the best, is that, you tell them like, yeah, go and catch 4 or 5 today. And like, hey, it felt great. So I did 13. And like, well, that may have been overdoing it. Like, and so I love that competition and that camaraderie and the sense of just being out there and kind of the movement meditation side of things. But sometimes it does. It just elongates how long that we're in this rehab process. And so I was like, yeah, we'll get there eventually, but I mean, it's just going to take you a little bit longer.
Oh yes, we see it all the time in the running populations. Pretty notorious for that, but it could happen with anyone. And there's educating that, hey, more doesn't equal better. More doesn't get you back faster. If anything, that can delay the process. But if some people don't get it, then we just have to program in a way that there's some people, if we want them to do 10, we'll tell them to do 50 reps. And there's some people, if we want them to do 10, we'll be like, do 3 reps of this. And
I love that.
knowing that they'll both get there.
Yeah, we see it in CrossFit too. And, you're exactly right. More isn't better. Better is better. And so sometimes you have to phrase that, you have to point that out to them exactly. Like, I want you to do 3 really good reps. And they're like, boom, 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 like 3 really good reps. And so, yeah, it just, we have to be diligent with our coaching, I think, cues as well too, and be diligent with like how we phrase things and who we're working with and how they respond to that stuff.
Yeah. And that's, even if you're listening and if you're not working directly with the coach, knowing, being in tune with some of those things, even back to the mindfulness stuff we talked about, of knowing that you don't have to leave every workout feeling beat up and torched. And
right.
I think this bridge is nice into talking about some recovery stuff too, of we think that we have to leave feeling super sore and be sweating and dripping on the floor to do that. But what's the problem you see with a lot of people in their recovery?
Yeah. Going back to my kind of my last patient too, as I said, I would rather have you go through a workout and feel like it was, only 85% of your capacity, but you can show up the next day and the next day and the next day, rather than going out 110%, and maxing yourself out and then being sore for the next 3 days or things like that. So, recovery it's fun. It's interesting because it has kind of gone from like a noun, like it just used to be like a day off, like, it's a recovery day, to now it's a verb. And like people are, they're doing more self-care than they've ever done. They go out and they put on the boots, or they go get an IV drip, or, people are spending more money on, mattresses than they ever have. And all these other, chili pads and stuff like that. The Whoop band and the Aura band, or the Aura ring, and all these other things, like they have tapped into something that I think is really valuable to people. And again, they notice it after, something like dry January, or they notice it after some kind of thing like, oh crap, I didn't know that humans were made to feel this good. And so there's a reason I tell people, like, there's a reason that people that are my age, in my mid or upper 30s, are still competing at a high level at like the Boston Marathon and cycling events and things like that. It's not because they're more athletic than they were when they were 23 years old. It's because they're smarter about their recovery. They're smarter about taking a day off. They're smarter about their sleep and what they're putting into their body. and how they train. And so when we talk about those kind of things, like um, no matter who walks in the door and whatever their issues are, like we automatically talk about their sleep, because I was a person that, as I was kind of going through my own kind of personal improvement and things like that, I realized we got a sleep number bed last year, and I remember telling a story to a tech that was 22 years old or something, and I was in my early 30s, and he was telling us about this big long vivid dream of his or whatever. And first of all, don't tell other people about your dreams. We could not be less interested. So boring. But he's telling me about this big long dream, and I said, "Cool, not interested." And I didn't want to sound like a dick about it, but he's like, "Well, don't you ever have dreams?" And I said, "No, I'm a grown-ass man. I am too tired to dream." And what it really amounted to was we get 7 years later, we get a new mattress, and I get a sleep number bed. I'm sleeping on a bed that is entirely too hard for what I like it. I get in this soft and cushy bed. I have the most vivid dreams for like the next 5 years or 5 months in a row. And I was like, oh, I slept like garbage for a decade. And so for me, I have noticed with the training and programming, or the training and stuff that I do, is that I have prioritized my sleep to like the nth degree. I know mentally and clarity as a business owner, it's really important for me to be able to express, thoughts and to know my patterns and to be able to talk to people about this stuff. But as an athlete too, is that I want to be able to perform really well. And I don't want to like limp into the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning and feel like garbage and I'm yawning, I'm taking energy drinks and stuff like that. So we prioritize it. Like everybody in the house basically goes to bed at the same time. My kids get to sleep in a little bit longer in the summer. So half the time they're tucking me into bed, and it's kind of glorious. Like these are dad goals. If you guys don't have them, is like, let your 8-year-old tuck you into bed. But like what it resulted in was like my bed kicks out this score every night and tells me, how well did you sleep the night before? And it almost consistently not very good. And so we cleaned up the amount that we drank a lot. Like that was a big factor for us, is like, you just don't realize it. Like you might have 2 beers or whatever, and it makes no difference to your life. You're not, feeling any of the effects of that alcohol. But I noticed that it took my resting heart rate with sleeping from 53 beats a minute to 68 beats a minute. I have a second beer, now I'm at 63 beats a minute. It's like, that is affecting the quality of my sleep. And when I am thinking about, performing as, a dad, I'm thinking about performing as a business owner, I'm thinking about performing as, an athlete, like that makes a difference. Those kind of things make a really big difference. And so those lifestyle factors have kind of, again, been habitual changes, but kind of driven by data, but driven by the emotion of like, hey, I want to get better. And so now these things become automatic for me, going back to, what we touched upon earlier, is because that's what I want to be. Is I want to be sharp, and I want to be, healthy, and I want to be fit when I'm 70 years old. And so I'm halfway, over halfway there. I want that stuff to continue.
Yeah, so much good stuff there. And I know personally, as well as people we work with, I've wrecked myself before on not managing stress and sleep well, and thinking that, I'm sure anyone that's been there thinks they're immune for a period of time, until all of a sudden you start dragging through the day and you start getting irritable and you start doing these things like happened to me not too long ago, from unaddressed, just trying to push and push and push. And it's something that's so important, but it's hard for people to see, especially we get type A people that are coming in. We get people who want to get better. They want to just accomplish all these things, but you have to know when to pull back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a gal now, and she's an engineer at one of our aircraft industries in town. And she's at the point now, we started working with her in December, and she does some nutrition coaching with my wife, and she does some strength programming with our coach on staff. But, she said, if you would have asked me about sleep in December, I would have just snapped right back, and I would have been so irritable about it, and I would have like ended the conversation. But like, again, her being consistent and her putting up these small, like 1% changes every day or every week or whatever, like it starts paying dividends. And she bounced into my office like last week for the first time in 2 months or something like that, and she's a different person. She has more pep in her step. She's energetic. You can tell she's leaned out, and she's trimmer and things like that. But all that stuff didn't come all at once. And we say, well, what are you still working on? She's I'm still working on my sleep. I'm still working on my workout. Like she's still working on being consistent with those kind of things. And so those are the things that we notice and we recognize, but it doesn't, you know, she said it so perfectly. It's like, I would have like bit your head off if you would have asked me about that, because I didn't think it was applicable to my pain. I was like, it's absolutely applicable to your pain. We'll talk about it later. And so,
Yeah. And we've had plenty of people that the most valuable thing we've given them, even as movement experts in these things, was teaching them how to manage their stress a little
yeah,
better and manage their sleep a little better. And it's like, hey, we're going to
absolutely.
get you started on these exercises because we see these things, but these things that you're presenting with don't match up with, based on all these other lifestyle factors
Yeah,
you have.
yeah,
These things need to be addressed. You're focused so heavily on, well, give me these perfect exercise programs, when if you're not addressing those other things, then
yeah,
it's all going to fall apart.
yeah. Get to bed 2 hours earlier, and you'll be amazed how much better you feel.
Yeah. My solution was adding an hour of sleep, and it's made the world a difference. I'm
And
like,
you're a great
well,
PT.
I
So
thought I could,
smart.
I thought I could do without that hour, but I guess I do need a little more than I think.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge.
But one thing I haven't gotten into tracking as much, and I know you mentioned you're doing a little bit of that, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, does the tracking get used as is, how do we use it as a tool, and how do we not use it as a crutch? Because I know some
Yeah.
people that get these whip bands and stuff, and they're like, okay, how do I hack my recovery and
Right.
beat my physiology of how do I sleep
Yeah.
less, stress more, and then push myself more and still get a better rating? So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I've had days too where I have gone out and, PR'd on a 5K or PR'd on a lift or something, and my sleep score was garbage. And on the flip side, I've had a sleep score of 94, and I got out and just felt, there's so many other factors besides your heart rate variability, or, the number of hours of, undisturbed sleep or whatever that go into this, and a lot of it is nutrition and, like you said, stress management and things like that. And so what you have to try to do, or what we try to do at our place, my wife and I kind of make it like a fun competition out of it. But the same way is the way that we try to do is we try to be able to like guess your sleep score. Like, we want to know what a quality of night's sleep feels like for us. So we try to guess our score before we even look at it the next day. Like, ooh, that wasn't very good. I'm going to say a 72. And you should be within kind of this ballpark range. And so when you have that, the consistent part of the tracking, like the data-driven part of the tracking, is really only a reflection of how you felt. And when you can tie those two things together, that makes the data ancillary. It's like, okay, here's that information, but how did I really feel about this kind of thing? Again, a little bit of mindfulness goes into that stuff, because you don't want to be driven by the data wholly and exclusively, because those are just numbers. You're not a robot. You're not driven by internal mechanisms. You're driven by all these other things. Like, we are big messy creatures, with baggage and emotions and things like that, if you're having a stressful day at work and you get off work and you had a great night of sleep, but you had a crappy day at work and ate like crap and had 2 beers, and then you come home and snap at your kids, like, that's not the point of any of this stuff. There's no point in tracking your data if you're going to go home and be a butthole.
I love that. It's keeping the goal, and our goal is not better scores or better metrics or better stress or sleep management on its own. The goal is to show up better for day-to-day life,
To be a better human being. Absolutely.
yeah. And that's so good there. And any other recovery strategies or things that you see people missing the ball on quite a bit?
For me, it goes back to sleep, and it goes back to eating real food, whole foods, and it goes back to not overtraining. I think that there's a wide gap of people that vastly undertrain, and a narrow margin of people that overtrain. But to, again, tie those things into, like, how does this make me feel, and again, how do I feel in reaction to my relationships, right? It doesn't do me any good to be to run really fast and be really strong if I don't have anybody to share this information with, or have anybody to share my life with, and things like that. So I always want to keep those things in the forefront of my head, is, how good of a dad am I being, and how good of a husband am I being, and a boss and a mentor and things like that. And so that's probably how I would, kind of sum that thing up.
No, I love that. And that's a perfect transition as we kind of wrap things up here today. And I talked to you when we originally spoke about having you on here, and started this podcast for guys specifically, and our lady listeners can get some stuff from it as well. But
Yeah,
there's just such a hard time for guys out there to admit some of these things, of that, hey, I am overstressed, or I'm not sleeping well, or I'm snapping at my kids. Like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm this great athlete or I'm this great CEO or boss or something. But if we're not prioritizing our relationships, then that can be harmful. And the same way it can be is if we look on the outside and see everyone with these shells of, oh, I have it all together and I'm just grinding and hustling and doing all these things and life's great. It can be harmful for people aspiring to get to those levels and be like, well, I'm not that stoic person that's doing all those things. And
Yeah.
we look at someone like yourself from the outside and successful business and great family, and you guys are doing so many great things. But if guys look to you and say like, how do you keep it all together? You're always a positive person to be around and all these things. And that can be a little bit of a skewed image in the social media world. So if you don't mind being real with people listening, what's a challenge you've been facing recently or something you faced in the past that's been a major catalyst for your growth as a man?
Yeah. I love this question too. And again, it requires me to kind of sit down and have a little bit of thought about like, to sit back and think about like what your personal vision is and what your family's vision, what's your guys' philosophy and what are your values. And so, if you're not like actively talking about these things with your family, or if you're not actively like thinking about these things, then you're just going to continue to, like fly by these things and kind of grind through them. And so one of the biggest struggles that I have, and I'm still working on, and I think that's the big point of this is like, do I have it nailed down? No. Am I working on it every day? Absolutely. And it's part of the reason that I'm doing mindfulness, and it's part of the reason I do this journaling and this gratitude every night at supper. We started with like 365 days of gratitude. We sit down and eat supper almost every night together. But it was like, hey, what are you thankful for? Hey, what are you thankful for? And every single night somebody has to think about it. And sometimes you're like, man, I'm thankful the trash man comes by and picks up our trash on Thursday. Like, great. That is something. And it's something that unless you are taking the time to think about it, it's something that you would just gloss over. It's something that you take for granted. And we are very fortunate in this country that we are able to take for granted so many different things. But the thing I am still working on the most is just being patient. And I think it goes back to a little bit of kind of that, type A philosophy. But both my parents are pretty hot tempered. We come from a pretty hot tempered family, and I can't remember I couldn't count how many times we'd just be driving in the car. We were from a town of like 1,200 people, tiny town in Western Kansas. And so just people, friends and neighbors that she knows, but somebody like turns slightly off and they don't hit their blinker and like, she's throwing the bird out to all these people. And you're like, Mom, like, this is your friend. Like, these people. Like, and so my dad is the same way. He's, kind of old school, like farmer guy and things like that. So, they don't have a lot of patience. And when I think about some of the things that I say to my kids and my son and things like that, I remember not too long ago, like I wanted my son, like I asked him to do these chores or whatever. And I was like learning out to him, like, just do your job. And he's like, he's freaking 10 years old. Like, cut him a break. And, you can be structured and you can have discipline, but you also have to be understanding. You have to be, vulnerable with these kids, and you have to let them know, like, hey, I don't have it figured out. I've never had it figured out. I am trying to be a better example of a dad than the one I had, and he was trying to be a better example than the one that he had. And so no one's got this template, all figured out, and everyone screws up along the way. And so to have something in mind that you're working on, and that's what I find that mindfulness does, or whatever, for me, is it puts like a 0.3 of a second buffer between the words that I want to fly out of my mouth and some of the words that do. And so that's the thing that I'm really working on, is to be more patient and to let them know, like, we have frank conversations. If I, blow up on the family because they were doing whatever, it's like, guys, I'm sorry, I'm working on it, I'm doing better, but I don't have it down right. And so to tell them, like, frankly, like very frankly, like, I'm not perfect at this, I'm trying to get better. Cut me some slack too.
Yeah, I love everything you said there, and I appreciate you sharing that. And there's you hit on both ends of the as you were talking there, both ends of the things that we tend to see is there's the people that feel like maybe they're not high achievers. They look at these people as these far away things, but it's like the people that we see as achievers have all sorts of setbacks and all sorts of things too. And yet the ones that are like, oh yeah, I know I'm crushing it and achieving it. It's like, hey man, you need to have some patience, grace, like tie back with the people around you. You're going to burn so many bridges and push people away because you think you have everything figured out. And I think we go through both ends of that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And so it kind of comes back to social media as well too, is, we're always, Father's Day is a great example. Is like, you're seeing, your feed just full of like these happy, go lucky families in these pictures or whatever. And like, again, don't compare your life to their highlight reel. Like this is like the best advice that you can give to anyone of any age. Is like, do not compare everyday life to somebody else's highlight reel, because how many pictures did it snap, or how many times the dad smack his kid on the head like, hey, stand up straight in this picture. Like, you don't know what was going on immediately before that picture or immediately after. And so, yeah, they had this nice, filter on or whatever, and it looks like a great picture, but that's not real life. And to not compare yourself to those people, you work on your own personal stuff and let them work on their own personal stuff. And there's no reason to compete with the Joneses.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such good advice for anyone. And would you say a big change for you has been the deliberate focus and intention around working on that habit? Is that something that's helped you quite a bit?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I like, today's my afternoon off. Like, I love to go and go find something to do with the kids. And instead of me just working separately on the computer while they're in another room, and they're in three different rooms, like, it's like, cool, let's go do something as a family. No, and I know, and I write these things down. Like, I pick out like one hard thing. Like, what is going to be the hard thing that you're going to come up against today? And when it comes up, be ready for it. And like, so what is the hard thing? It's like, okay, when we are all out going for a walk and the kids say something stupid, like, don't blow up. Like, just know that it's going to happen. Mentally prepare yourself and let it slide.
So true. That's something I actually started doing recently too. And it makes such a difference when you
Oh,
can
it's huge.
kind of frame in your mind of like, okay, how would my best self handle this if
Yes.
like, I'm not going to be reactive, being a little more
Yeah,
proactive with it.
for sure.
Yeah. No, I love that. So much good stuff here from a consistency standpoint, recovery standpoint, all things health and fitness. A lot of those last things you said too, on just growth as a person. And if I had to, I was jotting down some notes as we were talking here, and just to give some people a few takeaways to take from it. And I'll see if you have anything to add from it. First thing is tying your habit to an emotion and finding your deeper why. That's something that a lot of people, if you really want to take it to the next level and finding a new habit, sticking with it, that's going to be a big piece of that, is tying that to that deeper emotion. Going for small wins every day. Give yourself some grace during the process. You're going to have setbacks. Aim for being 1% better every day. This stuff just takes time. And then last thing I highlighted was better is better. So more is not always better. We tend to think so, but we sometimes need to actually throttle back to take a big step forward. So those were three. I had a lot of notes I took down, but those were big things that stood out to me. Anything you want to add with that, Courtney?
No, that's great. And yeah, absolutely. Those are fantastic little tidbits for anybody to live by, I think.
Awesome. So our last thing here, we have our hypothetical scenario that asking all of our guests. So hypothetical scenario, you're leaving a coffee shop and you bump into your younger self, younger Courtney, 10 years back. So younger Courtney asks current you for some life advice. You're on your way to a super important meeting. You only have 60 seconds to talk with him. What advice are you giving to him?
I love this question, and I thought about it in a couple different ways. One of them would be like, hey, throw that mattress out and go get yourself a new mattress right now. But I think the other thing would be, sit down and like actually think about like what is important to you, and what are you and your family's like real values, and is what you are doing moving you closer to the life that represents, right? For us, our values like really are focused around traveling and being together and things like that. Well, are we living that particular way? Like, if I just hammer down, like, I have the opportunity as a business owner, I can work 70 or 80 hours a week if I wanted to, but that's not living towards my values. And so if you are not, and this is not moving you closer, if you're not making these changes towards your values, then you have to stop and, go find something new, go find a new job, go find a new avenue for these things. And don't be afraid to fail. Like, this is, these comfortable little pods that, we get trucked into, driving, to work back and forth and sitting in traffic and all these other things. Like, are these things moving me closer to how I really want to live? And if they're not, you have to really sit back and take some reflection and make sure that, that if you are not currently moving toward it, like, you have a plan that is soon, like, yeah, I'm going to hammer out this job where I get paid, pay down all our debt. But the second it's done, like, then we're going to really be doing it. So really reflect on kind of what's important to you, and are you moving towards that?
Man, I love all that. And that's awesome to share. And the mindfulness stuff keeps coming back, the being deliberate with these things,
That was longer than 60 seconds. I think I could have just left it with mattress and he would have figured it out. He's a smart
yeah,
guy.
he's a soon to be smart guy. So he would have figured it out. Maybe you're just 15 seconds late to the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, if you let over a little bit, but awesome stuff today, Courtney. Really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, man. On Instagram, we're at Natural Wellness Physio, and same thing on Facebook, Natural Wellness Physio, and then our website's Natural Wellness Physiotherapy. But yeah, we love having a conversation with you, and thanks for having us on.
Yeah, really great, Courtney. Thanks for being on, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
All right.